This is the latest Planning Live. Welcome. Today we've got a conversation with Diarmaid Lawlor of Scottish Futures Trust. Diarmaid is an Associate Director at Scottish Futures Trust and is a national leader in the conversation about how we can make better places in Scotland. And that, with SFT, he's led the development of the recently published Place Guide, which we'll be discussing today, and has been a driving force behind various major place-based investment strategies, such in our Ardrossan and Granton waterfront. So chatting with him today is Elaine Farquharson-Black, who is a partner in the Brodie's planning team based in our Aberdeen office. And so on that note, I will hand over to Elaine to kick us off.
Thank you, George. Thank you. Now, Diarmaid, doesn't seem that long ago, actually. We were having our earlier chat was on one of our Brodie's house building conversations, and along with Jenna, your former colleague and my current colleague.
That's right, yeah.
And so I'm delighted that you've decided that you could come back and speak more, because we spoke a lot, and I think you and I could probably speak all afternoon and well into the evening.
Absolutely.
And planning issues. So I thought to try and kind of give it a little bit of a shape, we're going to cover three key areas, and no doubt that will meander down different kind of roads, and there'll be people in the audience that will have different areas that they kind of want to maybe get your input in. So I thought we would start with Scottish Futures Trust Place Guide, and I'll come back to that. Touch on 20-minute neighbourhoods, because I'm finding that's coming up a lot in the discussions, obviously, with NPF4. What does that mean? What's 20-minute neighbourhoods? And then the bit that's been missing out of all of this, it's the delivery programmes, and that's, the fourth part of NPF4, which nobody is really speaking about because there's nothing there. And I'm hoping that you're going to help us kind of find how we're going to do it, how we're going to get through it. So if we start with the Place Guide, and obviously Scottish Futures Trust launched it in November last year. And as I understand it, it's place-based investment strategies. I'm just summarising it very, very highly, kind of there. And I've obviously looked at it. You can find it online on Scottish Futures Trust website, and it's a guide. But I thought it might be helpful if you could talk a little bit about it. Who's it aimed at? Who in the audience? Is it just local authorities, or is it just developers? Or talk a little bit about how you want to see it being used.
Yeah, no, brilliant, and great to be back, Elaine, and thanks so much for the opportunity. So I suppose on the Place Guide itself, who is it targeted at? Anyone who is making a significant investment which will result in a significant change in a place. And so it depends on the place we're in. If it's Barra or Bankery or Bears, then that idea of significance is going to be different. So it's not necessarily huge amount of houses or whatnot. It could be in some areas it's about 10, but that would make a 6. So it's about significance. And I suppose on that bit of significance, and I know people in the audience will have had that, how do you get some joined up work and about big stuff to do good things, I think is the bit. So it's as hard sometimes in a small place as a big place. So the idea of the place-based or the Place Guide is to say, if there's something of significance that's going to drive a significant change, shouldn't we do that in a joined up way? Isn't that the best way to kind of do it? And to do that, you probably need some step-by-step or route map or some way of kind of getting into this. And there's a few foundations of it. So the first foundation is the place principle, which is an expectation that collaboration is the way that we're going to do public services and join up around some of the public benefits. So there's an expectation agreed between COSL and Scottish Government that that's the way that we're going to think about services, resources and assets. Foundation number one. The second foundation then is the place-based investment programme of Scottish Government that is looking at a framework, and not to replace the Green Book, but it's looking at a framework around the business case. Why are we putting stuff in here? What difference is that going to do? And how does that kind of come together? So it's almost like the case for change, which supports the Green Book and things like that. And then the third one then is kind of joining up across portfolios. So it's to try and get portfolios of government and portfolios of investment in certain areas to join up. So they're the foundations of it. They're your building blocks, your kind of policy building block on the place principle piece. Then moving into the place framework, which is trying to say, look, there needs to be a way that we can think about that around business case and investment bits. And then there's the kind of collaboration. So there's the building blocks in it. And I guess then the taking those building blocks, the place guide's providing a route map. And it's trying to say, well, how would we do that? And there's a little route map in the guide, but I kind of think you can boil it down to 4 things. So the first is about getting collective leadership, and before we get into the how we're going to do it and where are we going to do it and when are we going to do it, if we haven't agreed that we're going to do it together, then all those other steps are going to be a bit complicated and adversarial and difficult. So I think the first step is building up that collective leadership. That cannot be a sector specific bit. It cannot be a public sector only or third sector only. It's saying in this place to handle this significance, we kind of need to talk, and we need to build some way of having honest chats about what we're going to do and how we're going to. So that's number 1. And then the second bit is it's the simplest possible story of what are we going to do? Like not a kind of big plan, but it's just saying what are our shared intentions? So at any point in the process when we're doing stuff, we'd say, are we on the right track? And you need to have something to say, well, it's roughly this, so that's right. The third bit is a kind of a sequencing program, so it might be about managing tactics, it might be about choreographing investment, it might be about bringing together different prioritization stuff. So there's an order of doing. And I come from a master plan background, and I'm from an urban design background, and I studied urban design and I did very well at it, my mommy says. And I did lots of master plans. And when you're doing that, you kind of create a master plan on the idea that life will be like the thing you've drawn, but it isn't. And the issue then is, what do you do when life isn't what you thought it was going to be? You adjust. So the place guide is saying, let's be honest about the way the world is, as opposed to the way that we think it should be. And let's look at a handful of principles that allow us to manage the tactics of change and the order of doing. So that's really important. And then the final bit is a learning bit, not in a kind of academic way, but if we're going to keep doing things together, then it probably makes sense that when we do something, we step back and say, what worked? What would we do different? And how would we move it on? And when you're looking at a 20-year change, or when you're looking at a strategic investment, probably learning is a good thing to do because it allows you to adjust in tactics. So it's supposed to be a practical thing about who's in it, what are we going to do, what's the order of doing, and how would we do it better, if you like. That's kind of it. And inside it, you could use all sorts of tools, master plan if that works, a fag packet if that works. You know what I mean? So it's not about getting lost in the tools, it's saying, don't get lost in that, get obsessed in what are we trying to do.
You kind of talked, the first one there was about collective leadership, but I'm kind of even thinking before that, who do you see, is this something that the local authorities would lead on so that they come to me effectively and say, you've got a site that's allocated, kind of for development, we're kind of going to help. It sounds a little bit similar. Aberdeenshire had the kind of FIRS, the kind of infrastructure kind of group that they did try and kind of pull things together, and the different statutory kind of bodies to try and deliver the big sites. So, yep. Or do I go to the local authority and say, I've got a site, I want you to sit, I want you to use this?
So I think it can come both ways, and I suppose it goes back to that issue of significance, and there will be many clients that you work with that have worked on significant infrastructure projects, and no matter how much you try along that journey, you have to work with people. It kind of is it, and we know that. So it's about setting that out from the offset. So I think that there's a few triggers, I think, to why you might do a place-based approach with this collective leadership, as opposed to getting your own site and doing your own thing. And sometimes you know what needs done. I've bought the site, I've got my team, and just get on with it. So I don't need to go back over things. I just need to get on with it. So I think on the significance in the first bit, the first one is where there's piles of different investment coming in at different points. And when you're starting to look at it, you're kind of going, so if I dig a hole here and you come along next week and dig a hole there, then that just make life difficult for me. If you scale that up into big infrastructure like roads, or if you so you're kind of going, there's a few things happening here. We're kind of, so it'd be good to work that out. So just a practical sequencing of big investment that could be triggered by a private sector set of investments on the back of housing, or on some of the industrial stuff around the deals, or the Michelin's a great example of it, Dundee. So it could be triggered by big investment saying, we kind of need to look at this and how we might join it up so we can get through this faster and the outcomes can get delivered better. So that might be one trigger. The second one is where there's service change, and something like the National Care Services coming in and changing the way the landscape is working. That doesn't necessarily mean we're going to build a lot more new stuff, but it does provoke discussions about how we deliver service on the ground, where we deliver service on the ground, what infrastructure we have that might help that, what infrastructure that the housing industry might be about to deliver that might help that, and so you're kind of going, wouldn't it be good to have that chat up front? But the other one is a kind of crisis or a challenge sort of side. So like when Kilmarnock, experienced that when Johnny Walker kind of moved out, or when the Fraserburgh issue was happening up there. And so people coming in and say, right, or down in Port Glasgow, we need to kind of come in and address something. It's a cross-sector thing and we have to pile in. So I think it's about looking at triggers, big investment trigger where it makes sense to join up, big service triggers where it makes sense to join up, or a crisis thing where there's no other option but to join up. So it's kind of looking at those triggers and then flowing that through.
No, I like that, because we often think that planning seems to just be, goes into a plan and is seen as planning, and not as that corporate, not as that kind of the whole of the council. This is your plan. This means that you have to pull in education, health, kind of roads, all of those kind of things. How are we going to deliver that amount of economic development? We've allocated the land, but how are we actually kind of going to deliver it? So this does actually sound as if it's much more practical and much more, as you say, seeing it happen.
Exactly that, and industry, the capacity to deliver, the skills on coordination. When you start, taking that idea of the joining up stuff, sounds brilliant, doesn't it? And then you try and implement it, you kind of go, it's very complicated. So then you look at who's good at doing this. Industry's good at doing this. Industry's good at looking at the choreography of multiple parts, about managing supply chains, about bringing things in. So you can't really do joined up thinking without joined up doing, if that, you know what I mean? So I think that brings you back into the significance. If we're going to be making big investments through the city and region deals, through the net zero kind of space, through the landing of UK government stuff, and the way that the market kind of brings, and we're looking at transformational change, you have to look at that in a joined up way. You have to have a bit of joined up thinking, but not make it complicated thinking. And then you have to have joined up doing, but not make it competitive kind of doing. Do you know what I mean? And so that's where I think the collective leadership comes in to say, let's just get organized. I think it's about that, isn't it? It's just, and that could be as simple as a couple of meetings. It could be as simple as a couple of workshops. It might be more complex, like a partnership. So we're not prescribing the form of it, but I suppose really focusing on, be precious on the outcomes, get organized on what we're trying to do. I think, and the purpose of the step-by-step thing is not to try and follow the steps religiously and zealously. It's just saying a good starting point looks something like this. The next thing to do probably is something like this. And it's built on experience and evidence that people in Scotland are doing already. And hopefully with the guide, it just brings it together so that we can do more good stuff more consistently.
And you said that the kind of final one of that, of your 4 points is that kind of learning bit, so that people will evolve something that works for their area, and you always do that kind of debrief, isn't it? What worked well, what didn't work well. I loved your, it's joined up thinking to do good things. If we can just keep it at that level and keep it simple, because you think sometimes, isn't it? It's the enormity of the task, then nothing gets done.
Yeah, and absolutely. And there's one of the diagrams that I go to quite a lot is it's not a planning and development diagram. It's to do with the promise, and the promise is probably one of the deepest conversations that Scotland has had with its young people around the lived experience of being in care. And there's a particular diagram in the promise, which is a young girl called Isla. She's about 15 or 16. She's about to go into the care system. A whole lot of issues has happened in life. And you see this little girl on the diagram, little Isla. And then around her are 19 direct service points that are around her. And around that are 19 interfaces on the service points, which means that's 38 points around Isla, 38 phone calls, 38 emails, 38 walks and 38 streets, 38 bus journeys, 38 times being told, no, it's not here. No, you're down the road. So if you just look at that, you kind of go, and the person that's supposed to make sense and understand all of that is Isla in the middle of it. We need to make that diagram a lot simpler. And we can make that diagram a lot simpler. And we have a responsibility to make it a lot simpler. If you take Isla out of it and you put a major investor in it, very similar kind of bit. If you take the major investor out of it and you put foreign direct investment into it, very similar kind of bit. So I think it's absolutely about, regardless of whether we're trying to address poverty, or whether we're trying to address transformation, or whether we're trying to address the implementation of the national planning framework, it doesn't matter. Inside the middle of it, if the diagram's too complicated, that is the trigger to do joined up working for better stuff.
Yeah. So that's really useful and sets the kind of context as well. And I'm now going to take you back to your school days, back to your passion and your master planning and urban development.
Yes.
And 20-minute neighbourhoods. It's not a new concept, but it is now. It looks as though it's going to be embedded in NPF4, and it has people scratching their heads. What does it mean? And who's it aimed at, and how do you do it across Scotland? So, really open question to start with. For you, what is a 20-minute neighbourhood? What does it look like? What does it, involve?
For me, the most useful thing about it is to get people to think about what is the most relevant stuff within 20 minutes thinking of your life. So I don't care whether it's driving a car or cycling down or a lift on a tractor, it doesn't matter. So within 20 minutes of where you are, and the 20 minutes is abstract, it's not that. I think it's more about local. So whoever you are, wherever you live, around wherever you live, what are the most relevant and most important things that need to be there? And that for me is the key bit. It's not about trying to pretend that we're a chunk of Paris in Bankery, or that in Barra that you can reproduce bears in or whatever. So I think it was just about saying, for you, whoever you are, living wherever you are, what are the most relevant bits and the most important bits? And I think what the 20-minute neighborhood idea has done has to get people to think about, what should we be really thinking about locally? What's the stuff we need to get local? And then you can't get everything locally. So at the next level, you go on to the bigger neighborhood or the town center, whatever. What stuff should be there? And you can't get all the stuff there either. So when we go on to the kind of region level, what stuff? But it's a way of sorting out what stuff goes where, if you like. And I think when you start to think about it that way, there's a practicality about it to say, let's not pretend that we can deliver everything at the local level, but let's be clear on what's the most important thing we do at the local level, which brings us in to need, as opposed to random stuff, shiny stuff, weird stuff. It's just what is the 2 or 3 things that Isla needs in her street, wherever she lives. That for me is the basis of it. The rest of it, it's easy to get lost in it. I like to go back to, what is it that girl needs in her house, in her neighborhood, to live well locally?
Yeah, no, and I think that's an interesting, because it's a slightly different perspective. And I was slightly concerned. You talk about 20-minute neighborhood and everything living locally, and I had fears that effectively it becomes another developer contribution shopping list. And so that in my development, I need to make sure that I provide all of these things. It's that kind of wish list. Whereas as you described it, and that kind of the sort of the small circle to the next circle to the kind of bigger circle, that I won't expect to have to provide everything within my neighborhood, but what I need for the day-to-day. But then I could be expected to have to move into the bigger circle for the next thing, and then the kind of cities, because obviously I've been doing a bit of work with the 3 chambers of commerce to do with the cities and the impact that living locally has on cities. People haven't been coming into the city because one, they're being urged to live locally and stay local and not do the transport, and then you end up with kind of, you know, the empty heart of the city, and we need to make sure that we avoid that. And actually, what under your description, we need to make sure we've got the right facilities in the right circle.
It's exactly that. I think it's exactly that, and that goes back to the collective leadership chat about the joined up working to do good stuff. So then we can just be real and honest about the right stuff at the local level, real and honest about the right stuff at the next level, and on you go. But also we can be clear on what is different from the local to the city centre. So the difference is intensity of experience. That is the difference. And I think on the city centre side, you know, it's a very good point. In the COVID bit, what was really interesting, you know, regardless of whether you were looking at Union Street in Aberdeen, or when you're looking at the toll booth up in Stirling, or whether you're kind of on Princess Street, you know, those images where there was nobody on the streets, just like, where did they go? Right, they're obviously living here. But then when the releases and lockdown came, it was really interesting to see, where did people go? Even though the shops weren't open, they all went up to the town. So they went, and why did they go to town? They were yearning for something. What were they yearning for? They were yearning for the buzz, the crack, the intensity and stuff. So that yearning is still there. And I think what we're trying to do in the city centre, I know you had a really good chat last week with Tim Stoner from Space Syntax about the experience economy and everything. It's about reimagining the potential of the city centre. So the experience you get there is something you just cannot get at the local level. But at the local level, when you need the milk, you can get it. When you need to go maybe to, like, one of the other bits I thought was really interesting around how we've been looking at services is the Near Me platform that the NHS has provided. So based on an experience of the small isles where the nurse wasn't available anymore, they set up a kind of a I'll look after you piece. So people from the island drove around and looking after it. And then they had a phone call to the doctor, and then they had a digital kind of interface. And then with bits and pieces of sellotape and bringing it together, they got this great idea. And then this idea then developed up, and now it's a digital platform called Near Me, where anywhere you can get it. But if you took that Near Me idea and said, at local level, what would we need? If you had a local hub, for example, a building, and then you're able to go in, have a cup of tea, have a chat, and then push a button, somebody shows you to push the button, you get the interaction with the surgery, then you come out of the chat, you're able to debrief and do the bits and pieces. We haven't had to build a hospital at local level, but we've built a massive experience. But that is totally different to the experience of the city centre. So I think it's about being clear on the offer at those different scales, also at the provision at the different scales, and also the conversation about the asks and the inputs and whatnot. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So then everything kind of works in different ways for different reasons.
Yeah, and then that, as you say, will be different reasons and different things that are needed in different parts of the country, kind of as well. But transport presumably then also becomes quite important. Yeah, I think people felt the 20-minute neighbourhood, I would never have to get in my car again, or I'd never have to get in a bus because I can walk in 20 minutes. You know, it's that one of I can walk that far.
I don't think that's ever like a similar argument is made sometimes around housing communities and co-housing communities or sheltered housing communities, almost as if somehow magically we will create these autonomous communities where you never have to go out of it. It's never happened, it never will happen. We will still need communication links to different places, to different geographies. We will still need transport infrastructure. We will still need digital infrastructure. We will still need to visit our families and what. So the transportation infrastructure is still massively important, which brings you in, I think, to the spatial geography of priorities. So where should we be putting our development? What kind of development should we be putting into it? And then how should we be connecting it up? And around that, I suppose, if you think about the living well locally thing and the city centre thing, you're kind of going, okay, well, there's a bunch of options and choices at the local level, which are different to the options and choices at the city centre level. But we only have so much resource and so much capital and so much investment. So we need to be quite canny about our big infrastructure to put the right stuff in the right place, doing the right things. And then if you layer on the whole net zero agenda and whatnot, we're kind of going, we kind of need to make sure that we're doing the right things, but we're doing the best right things. I think. So will we need cars? Yes, we will. Will we need to connect to other places? Of course we will. Should it be exactly as it was in the past? No. Does that mean it's going to be worse? No. Can we make life better and different? Absolutely. Totally.
Which leads me nicely onto the third topic in terms of your spatial priorities. And you said, we've only got so much money, we've only got so much infrastructure, and it's about making sure that we kind of do the priorities and the right things. And so delivery program for NPF4, as I say, they went forward with the draft, and it's not yet kind of formulated, but I know that Scottish Futures Trust has been asked to help to support the Scottish Government in developing the NPF4 delivery programme. And I'm sure, like me, there's a lot of people listening today that's kind of going to say, well, what does that mean, in terms of what's the process involved, and what might the delivery programme look like? And I appreciate you're at the beginning, and you might not be able to to give a feel, because I think it's one thing that comes up regularly is delivery programs, and of course local authorities are going to have their own delivery program, for their LDPs. So
absolutely. So I suppose that SFT are delighted to be working with Scottish Government on the delivery program. I think that's a really good thing for the organisation, and it's a good thing in a small country to share skills. So we've got the National Planning Framework, which is a great document. It's been done with industry and communities and stuff. And then we've got this kind of delivery side as well. So I think that's a really great thing. We're at the early stages of it. And the first stage has been going back to some of the stuff that we talked about significance, right stuff, right place, right job, if you like. So deliver what? So the National Planning Framework, in a sense, is setting out a philosophy for a country. This is the kind of country we're trying to be. And here are the major geographies of transformation around that. So all good. Inside that, we need stuff. And I think there's a discussion about which stuff, but also we need to locate the stuff in the right place, doing the right jobs. So all good so far. But that's where, on the way that SFT have taken it, is to say, if we are really looking at a 25-year strategic plan for Scotland, then we have to take a 25-year strategic view. And there will be a near-term bit on that where we need money and coordination of money and resource to get some of the immediate stuff and the stuff in the pipeline. But we also need to be thinking about, and then in 10 years' time, what? And then in 15 years' time, what, and whatever. So the framework that SFT have been using are the recommendations of the Infrastructure Commission Scotland report, which is really taking a strategic view of need and also priorities. So if we say that the National Planning Framework is really trying to direct us to the where of major transformation, then the Infrastructure Commission will say, a report is saying, okay, inside the where there's certain needs. A key part of that then is, what infrastructure do we already have? What capacity do we already have? What investment is already in the system? What plans are about to land? And back to the joined up working for doing good stuff. How do we choreograph all of that cocktail better? So I think the first part of it is to understand the geography of transformation, and inside the geography of transformation, what's in motion? What's in motion? And is everything in motion the right stuff? And is it in the right order, doing the right things? And should we choreograph that? And so the next part that kind of comes with that is a prioritization bit, because even if we kind of look at it across for private sector and some of the pressures that are coming on the geopolitical side and the supply chains and stuff, we're all under resource pressure. So there's not going to be enough money for everyone to do everything we need to do. So everyone will be prioritizing. So on that needs basis, it's to say, okay, what is the best strategic next move that we kind of move into? And the SFT thing is trying to help with that. So that gives you the geography of transformation, inside of which we then start to look at the kind of needs. And then from that, then we start to look at how do we better choreograph what's already in motion, and then start to think about the priorities. Is that the same as saying, here is the money? Nope. But I think it's about setting out the framework for how do we make the decisions to get the best right stuff in the right place, doing the right things. And I think that is important, because as we project forward, as we project forward, it's about giving the clarity and certainty to the development industry and to the public sector industry. So that's part of it. And that's the starting point of the SFT kind of work.
And so, with people that are maybe on the call, is there an opportunity for people to get involved to, I suppose, suggest like areas? Would Aberdeen City say, well, I think the harbour, Aberdeen Harbour, should be, you know, a kind of priority of a national kind of development? Is there, are we going to end up in a beauty parade, or how?
No. I think there's a couple of things on it. So obviously there's the consultation process moving forward, and I know that government colleagues will be kind of progressing that as well. And inside that, they've identified a series of national projects. So there's that's one chunk, if you like, of the NPF. But the other chunk, which I think is interesting, is the interface of the national policies and the local delivery. So we've got a suite of national policies saying we're going to do good stuff, and then on the ground you're kind of going, how does all that come together? So I think in that there's three things that might be worth thinking about. The first is models. So if we take all those national policies and then you bring it into Aberdeen, how do we bring that together? What does that start to look like? You know, and who might have some ideas about what that looks like? So not yet where, but what? What does that look like? The second bit then is about saying, okay, clear on that, who might be able to do that then? You know, so if that's the model that we're trying to get in Aberdeen and building on the Countess Wells work or wherever it might be, what are the kind of, who are the people that might be able to do that? And then we kind of get into the locational pieces. So I think that it would be quite good to have those discussions offering in from industry, offering in from colleagues in local authority about the different models of translating national intent with local capability into doable models. And that around those doable models, looking at some of the capacity we have and capacity we need, and then kind of opening up the discussion about the locational piece on that. So there is, and there's challenge in that, of course there is, because there will be challenge in how the policy kind of comes, there will be challenge around the defendable policies. I'm pretty sure that Scotland, which has looked at models of how you do stuff, is one of the key things we should be looking at.
Because we talked about that before, you know, kind of go back a kind of decade, and we had the Scottish Sustainable Communities Initiative, where we had the exemplar developments to try it with charrettes and trying to get the kind of the design and the placemaking, you know, kind of started, and I suppose moved up the agenda kind of then. So we have done those kind of exemplar projects.
We have, and also I suppose looking in the system, you know, if you look at the take net zero capital investment over the next period of the Parliament, there's about £5 billion committed in various different bits between natural assets, heat networks, decarbonising the public estate. That's quite a lot of amount of money. And then we have the UK government kind of looking at a variety of different investments and whatnot. So when you say, well, there's money moving around, you know, and it's not always easy to get it, but there's quite a lot. But you look at that and then say, well, what are the different ways we could organise that? So to be able to posit ideas of how that could come together, to be able to demonstrate, to be able to articulate, I think that becomes really important for local authorities to say, okay, I get it, this is how we could do this. For industry to say, great, this is how we could do this. And then for national government to say, this is how we can wrap around this. This is how we can support it. So to build coherence around that, and initiatives like the Scottish Sustainable Communities Initiative were interesting because it was the opposite of the New Towns, Eco Towns model that the English partnerships have progressed down south, where there was where in Scotland it was felt that because of the diversity of the geographies, we kind of need a suite of different examples rather than one that you roll out. So the principle behind that, I think, is sound, but it needs to be a collaborative thing because industry has gained huge skill and capability in how you do stuff. Local authorities, although they're very stretched and absolutely have huge capabilities in how we do things. So if we can start to bring that together, that means that we're not rolling out national answers at local level. We're actually using the national policies with the local capability to create different models of how you live well locally across Scotland.
Yeah, I mean that is one of the things when you look at NPF4, it's that national level So what local development plan, well, it's at that kind of development plan stage and the development management stage. You know, what are we doing nationally? And then what is that going to look like in an LDP? And then what does that mean to me when I put in a planning application? You know, that's the bit that I'm actually having a little bit more kind of colour on that, and that kind of help. I mean, it does sound as if, you know, we started obviously with the place guide, and you have talked about pulling all of these things together. That, I mean, the delivery program is exactly that as well. By the sound of it, you're pulling it together.
That's the intention, Elaine. Yeah, it's that the infrastructure investment plan in Scotland is really interesting. So it's a Scottish government side, and it has a little hierarchy in it that says for us to make investment decisions, there's 4 levels. The first is need. The second one is make more of what we already have. The third one is pile a couple of things together. And then the fourth one is build stuff. And I think if you follow that sequence, you kind of go, there's a lot of challenge in that, because to make more of what we already have, sometimes we have to provoke and say, maybe we should stop doing this and change here and adjust that. So there's a joining up there. If we're going to bring things together, we have to be honest about when you bring things together, sometimes the cultural bit of bringing things together can be challenging, but the outcomes can be awesome. And if we're going to build new things, it needs to do more work. And the industry knows this as well, because you've got net zero and all sorts of stuff. So as we start to bring all those layers together, that is the bringing it together kind of bit. That's a key part of it.
Yeah. No, I mean, you mentioned, obviously, I was at the conference last week that that Tim was at. You know, we were talking about transformational change, and it's always, you know, generally the most controversial has the potential to be most transformational, because we don't like change. That's the problem generally. You know, we don't like, you're normally quite comfortable, and if something carries on, but it is that change. I mean, do you think this will finally be the chance that everybody, we've talked about collaboration, I think, with every planning reform, and we moved from development control to development management, and it was all about changing the culture, not necessarily legislation. And there's definite kind of collaboration theme coming through here, and working together in that kind of collective leadership. Do you think this now gives us the tools that we'll see that, you know, happening in practice?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think transformational change happens when you've got the conditions in place, you're clear on the components, and you've got the right timing and leadership. So you bring all those bits together. So if you look at some of the experience that Scotland has created through the experience of the city and region deals on multi-sector partnerships. If you look at the experience that Scotland has generated around the way that we've delivered schools and housing, if you look at, you know, all these kind of things, so you move across it and kind of going, this country has built a lot of capability. So why don't we invest all this learning and this capability into the way that we do the planning as well, so that planning is invested in it and wrapped around it. It's not a separate thing. So we're investing into the system, as opposed to expecting the system to create the thing. Do you know what I mean? So pile it in. We've got a lot of experience, pile it in. And at the Glasgow regional level, the way that the program management's working is really interesting. At the Shetland and the island level, really interesting. So we're building up these skills. So I think that using those skills, linking it to that national planning framework with the policy framework that allows, says, okay, now squish it together. Let's do it, and not see planning as a separate tool, to see it as key and core, but invest into it, invest in the resourcing, invest in the knowledge, invest in the possibilities.
Yeah, no, I think the George, have you got a question that you want to?
Yeah, I was trying to get in, but it was.
I know who's speaking.
It was one that came in a little while ago, or at the beginning of this final section. Can the NPF4 delivery plan learn from the experience in Ireland in setting up a capital investment programme that provides the resources to deliver the aspirations, national developments and infrastructures identified in the NPF?
Well, as an absolute Irishman, of course, we can all learn from Ireland on pretty much everything. But on that particular question, I think yes. And I think that for me, I think what's really important is to look at the totality of capital, as opposed to just looking at the bits that are going to be dealt with through Section 75 or other in the planning system. So let's look at the totality of it. And that's where I think that the review of the infrastructure investment plan and the way that it's trying to coordinate investment across the public sector portfolios, but also link it into the delivery program of the NPF, provides the bones of a similar kind of thing, but it also provides us with a framework to make the right decisions in the right place for the right reasons, doing the right stuff. So I think that there's definitely learning, there's definitely opportunities for collaboration, but it's still important to work with the distinct differences of Scotland and some of its issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, Diarmaid, you need to stand for election as the party of doing good stuff.
I definitely will register that immediately, Elaine. I definitely will. But on a serious point, I think one of the issues around this is language and the way people talk. So sometimes in professional land, we can say many impenetrable things. And the problem with that is that it's really hard then to bring everybody with us. So I think it's important to try and just grind it down to basics. And then from that, we can build up the complexity, but let's not start off with the impenetrable. Let's start off with the basic and layer up, I think, you know.
Yep. George, is that another question come in?
Yeah, there's one more to come in then. So again, on the MPF, actions and delivery is a key part of the MPF4 and requires collaboration. However, how do we better embed accountability and behaviour change within the process?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting question, because again, it kind of brings you into a multi-layer bit. So there's the accountability at the Scottish ministers level. If the Scottish ministers are the ones who created this national plan with this philosophy and intent, then that's one level of accountability to say, are we doing it? So that's a legitimate question. Then I think at the next level down, the planning of infrastructure tends not to happen at a single site. It tends to happen on bigger geographies. So it's on that multi-level bit. And that was one of the interesting bits I thought around the NPF, around trying to get contiguous local authority collaboration to say, well, if there's roads moving and if there's systems moving, you know, let's just try and plan it a bit better. Do we need formal governance for that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but we definitely need agreement that that is the best way to handle those bits. And then I think at the kind of local level, the idea that the local development plan is still an extremely important corporate document for councils and members and industry. So the stronger we make the LDP, it means there's collective accountability by industry, by members, and by officials. So, but I think it's important to look at those three levels, because it would be a shame if we just focused only on the local level of that. Whereas as a national planning framework with a 10-year horizon, it's the Scottish ministers' accountability. Are we doing it? It's a contiguous authorities. Is this making sense? And then it's at the local level to make sure that our members are invested with the best training to ask the best questions. Our officers are given the best support to make the best decisions, and our industry are invited to kind of come in and do the best things in the best way.
Before you go to another question, George, I just want to kind of come in the back of it. We've kind of gone quiet on regional spatial strategies. You know, is that the kind of contiguous local authority and the kind of working together? Because obviously we've got rid of strategic development plans and we've got that, but is that the role that you see the regional spatial strategies filling?
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting time to talk about region, given that we are also at the point where the regional economic partnerships are developing, and they will have a view around regional interfaces and the just transition, also how that plays out. So I think we've got a series of regional thoughts, regional mechanisms that are coming together that are implicitly spatial and implicitly have, and then when you layer on the national economic strategy, bringing it together. So if we don't have the regional spatial strategies as an instrument in itself, what do we have? We have a national planning framework that is telling us to kind of bring things together. We've got local authorities that are determined to collaborate and work together. And then we've got these regional bits. So should we be using the regional economic partnerships and investing that with spatial planning expertise and thought? Or should we be separating out a regional spatial strategy and hoping the economic strategy comes in? So do we need to exploit mechanisms, or do we need more? And I kind of think there's something in how do we exploit and invest the mechanisms that are there and demonstrate powerfully and purposefully the power of spatial thinking and spatial participation by industry and partnerships.
George, you better come in or we'll carry on chatting.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that probably wraps up today. If you have asked a question and there are some outstanding, we'll follow up with you separately. But thank you very much for raising those. Sorry we didn't get around to it, but obviously there's a lot to talk about. and there's, as Elaine said, it could be a lot more to talk about. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Diarmaid, today for joining us. Thanks for Elaine for leading that discussion. And I suppose before we finish up, just want to flag our next Planning Live event. So this is on Thursday, the 28th of April, same time, 4 o'clock, and it's a conversation with Robbie Calvert of RTPI. So thank you very much again for everyone for joining, and hopefully we'll see you then. And yes, a recording will be following this. It'll be sent around to you. And yeah, thanks for coming, everyone, and have a good rest of your week.
Brilliant. Thanks, George. Thanks, Elaine.